everyone, my name's Ali and welcome back to my channel, Mindful Living. In today's video, I'm going to be talking all about shade-tolerant vegetables. So there are quite a few edible plants that can survive in partial shade or limited sunlight. Partial shade is usually referring to an area of the garden that receives anywhere from 3 to 6 hours of sunlight each day. It may also be an area that receives filtered sunlight, and that might be because the sunlight is being filtered through other plants or trees. Regardless, as long as your garden receives a few hours of sunlight each day, there are quite a few plants that are going to thrive in a more shaded location, so let's go ahead and get started. The first shade-tolerant vegetable I'm going to recommend is kale. Kale is a cool season crop, it's loved for its slightly bitter leaves, and it is able to grow in partial shade and it will actually make the leaves taste better. Kale doesn't like hot temperatures, so it's best to grow in the spring or the fall. You can harvest the leaves at about 30 days and enjoy the baby leaves of kale, or wait 60 days or more for it to grow to full size. There's all different types of kale. The one I'm growing here is a dwarf blue curly variety, so grow whatever type you enjoy eating. I've grown my kale in the shade every year and I've had a lot of success growing it this way. Typically, I plant kale in the springtime, and if I leave it in a shady location, I can continue growing it into the summer months as well. Next plant on my list is another leafy green, which is Swiss chard. This type of plant is quite adaptable. It can tolerate some heat, it can tolerate shade, so you really can't go wrong with planting a few of these in your garden. Swiss chard does usually like full sun, but you can easily grow this in anywhere from 3 to 4 hours of sunlight a day. Keep in mind that plants that are grown in partial shade will grow a little bit slower. I recommend growing multiple plants in one container, that way if it does grow a bit slower, you still have tons of leafy greens to enjoy. I'm growing the Bright Lights variety here, so I have a few yellow Swiss chard growing. And there's so much you can do with this in the kitchen. If you missed my whole video on growing Swiss chard in containers, I did show a Swiss chard roll-up recipe. This was absolutely delicious, so make sure to go back and check that out on my channel as well. The next vegetable that you can grow in partial shade is beets. Normally beets will grow in about 6 hours of direct sunlight per day, but I've grown mine successfully with only 3 to 4 hours of sunlight. Growing beets in less sunlight does mean that you will have a smaller beetroot, but you will have lots of delicious leafy greens to eat and enjoy. The leafy green part of your beets is edible and it will do a lot better when it's grown in shade. You can harvest the greens off your beets and use this like you would any other lettuce. The greens are usually ready to harvest in about 30 days, and depending on the variety, your beets should be ready in approximately 60 days. You can harvest them when they're about 2 to 3 inches in diameter. Another vegetable to consider growing in shade is carrots. I'm growing a kaleidoscope blend of carrots, which has a variety of different colors ranging from oranges to purples to red. Carrots should be directly sown in their container or the ground. They don't like to be transplanted, so just keep that in mind when you're growing them. Carrots do better in cooler temperatures. They like up to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, so you'll want to start planting these in early spring. I would say about 2 to 3 weeks before the last frost date for your area. Growing carrots in partial shade will mean that your carrots grow a little bit smaller. Depending on how large you would like your carrots to grow, you can harvest a baby carrot at around 30 to 40 days, or wait over 60 days for them to get to a larger size. But like I said, carrots that are grown in partial shade will not be as large as those grown in full sun. Another plant that handles shade very well is leeks. Last year was my first time growing leeks in my container garden, and they did really well in a spot that receives some morning sunlight and afternoon shade. On a typical day, my leeks were probably getting about 4 hours of sunlight, and I didn't have any problem growing them in a more shaded location like this. Leeks are very similar tasting to onions, but they have a more mild, sweet flavor. You're probably going to want to start these from seed indoors or purchase a transplant from your local garden center, as leeks take a really long time to grow, anywhere from 70 to 120 days depending on the variety that you're growing. Most of the time they're ready for harvest in the fall before the ground freezes. Moving on to plant number 6, which is one of my favorite leafy greens, and that is arugula. Arugula is a cool season crop, so most of the time gardeners will plant this in the spring or the fall, and that's because arugula does not like extreme heat or high temperatures. Ideally, you want to grow this in anywhere from 45 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, but if you grow it in the shade, you are able to extend the lifespan of your arugula. I'm able to grow mine into the summer months by putting it in a location of my garden that only gets about 3 hours of sunlight, and this is always morning sunlight followed by afternoon shade. So when the heat of summer sets in, the plant is more protected. It's less likely to wilt or bolt in a shaded location, so if you do want to grow this for a little bit longer, then choose a location of the garden that gets mostly shade. Some of my favorite ways to enjoy arugula is topped on my sandwiches or burgers, and of course an arugula salad. I love mixing it in with my salad greens and it adds a nice peppery kick. Another shade lover in the garden is lettuce greens. You can grow all different types of lettuces and they're all going to do really well with just a few hours of sunlight. In fact, growing your lettuce in shade is actually shown to be more beneficial. Lettuce that is grown in the shade is less likely to bolt or wilt. It will also be more flavorful, producing sweet, tender leaves. So I highly recommend you grow all of your lettuce in a shaded location as long as it receives about 3 hours of sunlight. I grow my lettuce throughout the spring, summer, and fall. During the summer, I choose to grow heat-tolerant varieties like Little Gem or Butter Crunch. Growing your greens in shade like this means that you're not limited to just growing during the cooler months. And last but not least, my 8th and final plant on the list of shade-tolerant vegetables is spinach. Like arugula and lettuces, spinach is also a cool season crop that prefers to be planted in the early spring or fall. Once the temperature starts to increase and it gets hot out, your spinach will bolt and go to seed. You can prevent this by growing spinach in a shady spot, and that will also increase how long you can keep it growing in the garden. Spinach is ready for harvest in anywhere from 30 to 45 days, so if you want to keep it growing longer throughout the spring and summer season, then make sure to put it in a spot that only gets a few hours of sunlight. This is especially important when temperatures are above 75 degrees Fahrenheit. If the temperature is above this, you definitely want to give your spinach some afternoon shade. Well, that's it for this video today. I hope if you guys enjoyed learning about the most shade-tolerant vegetables, that you will leave me a like. Make sure to leave a comment down below and share what you're growing in your garden this year. And of course, hit that subscribe button. It really does help to support me and my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in my next one.